Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on the 6th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling us at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. You can find all of this information on our website anytime, weather.gov/Alaska. And if you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. Use my email at david.snider@noaa.gov, and I'll be happy to help you find what you're looking for or perhaps provide some insight or answers into what you're seeing on any of our services around Alaska. As always, it's my pleasure to serve you any way I possibly can. As we look at what's going on around Alaska's weather, as far as more extreme or concerning events go, we're watching for the potential of some heavy rain that could produce some flash flooding around the upper Kuskokwim Valley all the way into Denali National Park. What that means for you is if you're out fishing or perhaps you're going for a hike in our wonderful national park up the road, it's a really good idea to pay attention to the weather that's going on upstream of where you're going to be enjoying your time outside. The weather can change very quickly, as we all know, around Alaska, and in this case, weather upstream could be dumping a lot of rain in very narrow watersheds, and if that's the case, flash flooding could occur, and you might not even expect it. This is happening in terrain that we do see flash flooding and occur frequently this time of the year, and because of that, we want you to be safe. So make sure that you have a way to monitor the weather and get alerts if you can, and if nothing else, just avoid some of those more shallow and terrain-induced areas that could produce some flash flooding in those areas. So flash flood watch continues until tomorrow afternoon for the upper Kuskokwim and parts of the Denali National Park region there. And you can find more information about this at weather.gov/Alaska. As we look at fire danger, you'll notice that is retreating considerably from where it was just about a week or two ago. No areas listed now across some of our northern terrain. Everywhere north and west of the Alaska Range has been pulled out of that fire danger region, so we're still continuing to monitor the southern Susitna Valley, the Matanuska Valley, and down into parts of the Kenai Peninsula, but even that has greatly improved just in the last week or so. We're still seeing some areas of high fire danger around the Copper River Valley as well. The municipality of Anchorage, I believe, still has a burn ban, and no matter what municipality or part of Alaska you're in, make sure you're checking on local fire weather conditions where you are and check before doing any outside burning. Campfires, again, may be included in some of this, and it's always a good idea to know the rules and know what your limitations are before you get into that situation. So, as always, be careful with fire. The visible satellite picture shows some beautiful weather out across the Gulf of Alaska, stretching from Kodiak eastward. You can see a lot of sunshine today occurring across central and western parts of the Gulf. Just to the north and to the south of that, though, you can see the effects of high pressure, keeping the atmosphere very stable, not allowing a lot of those clouds to bubble up and produce any showery or thunderstorm type weather. Instead, this is widespread stratus, areas of drizzle and fog likely occurring in this area here. A beautiful smooth layer of clouds occurring in that region, and some of that has been pushing into places like Yakutat, Sitka, and the southern inner channels there, where high pressure is keeping that pretty much in place. But we have seen improving weather throughout the day across some of those outer and southern coastal areas in southeast. So after starting out with some fog and low stratus, some of that has improved. Across the Alcan border this morning, you can see the clouds setting up across the region, a little bit of a northwesterly flow thanks to that jet stream that you'll see in our aviation section coming up here in just a minute. It's more of a northwesterly orientation right now, so that's allowing that cooler air to drop in from the north and push a frontal boundary right up against the Alaska Range. As that's moving very slowly, that's what's giving us that potential for that heavier rainfall across some parts of the interior, Denali National Park down to the upper Kuskokwim. Out across the west, the clouds take on a slightly different texture there, and they're getting a little more convective, so that rising air is becoming part of our weather picture there. While high pressure is in charge of most of the region, you'll notice several waves, though, working through the central and western Aleutians, and as you notice, some of that is a southerly flow. That's still pushing moisture into southwestern Alaska and coming up against that northerly, cooler, drier flow coming in off of the Arctic coast right now. We'll continue to see unsettled weather across the Beaufort Seacoast, but for the meantime, there really isn't a whole lot of precipitation out there. A few areas of showery weather across the central and eastern interior as that frontal boundary is dropping south. Areas of fog across the eastern Gulf Coast, high pressure sitting across the western Gulf and south of Kodiak Island, around 1,033 millibars. We have a weak area of low pressure here across the Aleutians, a stationary boundary. It's not moving very much, and another wave of low pressure north of the high sitting across the Bering. Cooler, drier weather is coming in from the Arctic coast. That's pushing southward. A fairly decent high-pressure system for this time of the year, 1,025 millibars. That will continue tracking south and east into the northwest territories of Canada as we get in through tonight and tomorrow. A weak disturbance will sit across the northern Gulf. Really not much to write home about, but what it is doing is certainly drawing in some drier air off of the continent. That northerly flow is chipping away the cloud cover across the Kenai, Kodiak Peninsula, all the way down toward the Alaska Peninsula, and really most of the Copper River Basin as well. The only places that are going to experience that foggy stratus kind of layer is going to be out here across southeast. Some of that may get banked up against the inside passage for a time in the morning, and then it should probably peel out, at least in part, as we get into your Wednesday afternoon. Generally calm weather, though. High pressure giving us a southern air moving in through the central and western chain, blowing in some warm and wetter conditions to the western Bering Sea. Areas of light rain possible around some of the disturbances you see there, but for areas by and large, really stable weather. Not a whole lot going on, and certainly not a lot of wind. As we get into Wednesday, that disturbance across the Gulf really doesn't move very much. We'll continue to see generally dry and somewhat high clouds, I guess, lingering across south central, but again, not really producing any widespread precipitation. Areas of showers should exist across the southwest, the Alaska Range, and into the eastern interior, and probably into the middle Tanana Valley. If we get enough sunshine, there's enough moisture and instability, we may see some showers, perhaps even a thunderstorm around places like Eagle and west into the interior. And there could be some room for some of the shower and thunderstorm activity we see across British Columbia and the Yukon to drift southward into some of the higher terrain in the Boundary Range around southeast. So areas around Petersburg to Ketchikan and Annette might be on the watch for a few showers and storms tomorrow afternoon. Again, that's kind of a long shot, though. For areas in the western Bering, showers, fog, and drizzle still possible. Some of that will be found around Macoriac to Omonoc and into parts of Norton Sound. High pressure still in charge of the weather around the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, so generally quiet weather, though you may have plenty of clouds, fog, and stratus at times. As we get into Thursday, an isolated shower or thunderstorm could pop up across the middle Yukon Valley and southward into places like Denali National Park. Most of that will be located to the west and north of the region. Watch for showers across parts of the eastern interior, and showers will be possible across southern parts of southeast. For Bristol Bay in toward Dillingham, King Salmon, upward toward just south, let's say, of Bethel, and into McGrath, probably looking at some light rain, maybe some drizzle as we get into Friday. High pressure still sitting in the same old spot, so if you've had weather Tuesday that's not that great, or you've had some really wonderful weather since this afternoon, chances are you're going to have very similar weather as we get into your Wednesday and Thursday. Not a whole lot's going to change there. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf hovering around 1,010 millibars, still working to draw in drier air off the Alaska Range. So if you're in south central along Cook Inlet all the way down toward Kodiak Island, Prince William Sound to Yakutat, chances are things are looking pretty good for you, and they will stay good as we head through your Thursday. Let's take a look at temperatures. As we get into tonight, areas across the North Slope still looking at temps above freezing, upper 30s to about 40 degrees for Utqiagvik east toward Kaktovik. Shishmaref, 51 there for our friends in Nome, 47. Amonoc, you're looking at temps closer to about 51 degrees. Unalakleet, lower 50s. And into Bristol Bay, probably mid to upper 50s overnight. Kodiak Island, 54, and you'll see similar temperatures all the way down the Alaska Peninsula into the chain, 50 in St. Paul. Upper 50s to almost 60 degrees in southeast, fairly mild, and it gets even warmer by the afternoon for your Wednesday. Mid to upper 70s, in fact, around Haines and Skagway, you're looking at temperatures that are really starting to nudge up on that 80-degree mark with that drier weather in place. South Central, we're also talking about some very warm weather for this part of the season. Looking at highs in the mid to upper 70s. Kenai could be one of those places at 77. Lower 70s around the Copper River Valley, so Glen Allen all the way out toward Northway and Eagle. Temps in the low to mid 60s to even mid 70s at times. The middle Tanana Valley in the mid to upper 60s, they're pushing 70 degrees from Tanana westward toward areas out toward Ambler and Bettles. It might be a little bit cooler, mid 60s there. Utqiagvik just shy of 50 degrees, 42 in Kaktovik. Wainwright right around 50 degrees. As you get out toward Kotzebue, lower 60s there. McGrath, lower 60s as well. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, about 67. Overnight lows on Thursday morning, mid-50s for you. Kodiak, about 54. Southeast, looking at temps in the mid-50s. Sitka, about 56. Petersburg and Wrangell, probably looking at temps in the upper 50s there. As you get into the Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet region, you're looking at overnight lows in the lower to mid-50s. Cordova, Prince William Sound, probably about 50 degrees or so. The middle Tanana Valley, closer to 50 degrees. Areas west and out toward Ambler and Bettles, you're looking at overnight lows in the upper 40s. Places like Galena, about 51 degrees. Kotzebue, 54. Wainwright, 44. And Kaktovik dips into the upper 30s once again at 37 degrees. 41 in Eagle. with Fort Yukon coming up to 64 by Thursday afternoon. Mid-60s and lower 70s for southeast. The cooler temperatures you see in southern southeast, mainly due to the chance of rain there in the afternoon. South central, we're going to see another warm day with temps in the mid to upper 70s. Some places will push 80 degrees in the Susitna Valley through the end of the week. Closer to 70 around southwest as you get out toward Lake Iliamna. A beautiful 70 degrees there in the water, 64 around McGrath, and about 60 in Unalakleets. Temps about 57 in Nome, Gamble, Sabunga, lower 50s. AKwx 60, 54 in St. Paul and St. George, and 48 for Utqiagvik, with Fort Yukon at 64 on Thursday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. IFR conditions are going to be fairly widespread across the eastern Gulf. Some of that's been producing fog in the last couple mornings there across the outer coast, so pay attention to that and don't be surprised if you see some of that sneaking into the southern inside passages as again we get into your Wednesday morning. IFR concerns will linger across the Alaska Range, both north and western areas there, and also across the southwestern Capes into Bristol Bay and a large chunk of the Aleutians into the Pribilofs and up towards St. Matthew. North of St. Lawrence Island, watch for widespread VFR conditions across the Chukchi coast. You'll see a little bit of marginal conditions sneaking into the upper Kobuk and Noatak Valley regions, as well as areas around the northern sections of the Yukon Valley and the flats. And once you get back to the Chukchi coast, things still look fairly VFR, but IFR concerns will linger around the Beaufort. And you see that pulls back just a little bit there by Wednesday afternoon. Not a substantial change there across the North Slope. MVFR spreads eastward down the summits of the Brooks Range. Watch for some convection across the Yukon Flats and also across the southern parts of the Inside Passage, maybe even some of the boundary range there across Hyder and points northward toward Petersburg. IFR conditions just outside of Dixon Entrance and will continue IFR concerns south of St. Lawrence Island over all of the Bering Sea really, and a large chunk of the Bristol Bay and southwestern Capes and most of the Aleutians. By Thursday afternoon, not much change across the north. Watch for VFR mainly across the Yukon Valley. You'll see MVFR and IFR sneaking into Norton Sound, Unalakleet southward into parts of the southwestern Capes. IFR hit and miss across the Alaska Range, still lurking across southern parts of the Inside Passage. VFR really for most of the Gulf and really most of the interior and south central. Thursday afternoon, no big change. You see IFR pulling back just a little bit across the western coast, but it's also sneaking northward now into Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, and north of St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait. Chukchi and Beaufort seacoast concerns. IFR lingers there for you. Watch for some convection across the Tanana Valley and points west, and IFR still lingering just outside of the Dixon Entrance and south of Port Alexander. Let's take a look at your pass conditions for your Wednesday. VFR for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, no question about that. Things look like a smooth start there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will start out at IFR. Some improvement as the day goes on. Rainy Pass expected to see a little bit of improvement as we go. Windy Pass, a start at IFR expected, and then as we move through Isabel Pass, marginal conditions developing by the afternoon. Metasta Pass starts out at IFR with quick improvement throughout the day to VFR. Tanita Pass looks like marginal conditions to start your Wednesday. VFR expected as the day goes on. Portage Pass, VFR conditions expected there throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see visual flight roll as you get through your Wednesday. A cool pocket of air is sitting across the northwestern territories and northern parts of the Yukon. Look for 6, 8, even 10,000 foot levels there across the interior. That really falls off quickly, actually builds up quickly, I should say, south of the Alaska Range to 14,000 feet across southern parts of southeastern Gulf. A lot of warm air still sitting in the south, but cooler air is trying to make inroads into parts of northern Alaska. Out west, you can see levels there across the Bering and parts of the Aleutians still hovering way up there at 10 to 12,000 feet. What about icing potential? Well, there's moisture there, but really the only impact we see right now is going to be an isolated moderate threat across the upper Yukon Valley and the Yukon Flats, generally above 9,000 feet, and that's a generally small area tomorrow as this is moving from northwest to south and east and just kind of grazing the Alcan border region. You can see that clearly on the jet stream. The path coming in from the Arctic jet from the north and west brings that in around 60 to 65 knots. High pressure still really in control of the southern regions of our state. Low pressure is kind of working its way in there across the west coast of California. Looking at that a very light southerly flow working in, but the westerlies are kind of winning out right now across the northern Gulf. We also have another wave of low pressure out in the west, not terribly strong, but it's enough to keep the ridge of high pressure that you see across the west coast intact, and that colder air shunted off to the east. So right now, northwesterly winds are the dominant flow, 15 to about 25 knots at 9,000 feet. High pressure sitting south of Sand Point, giving us a southerly flow across the Aleutians and into the central and northern parts of the Gulf. Southerlies continue across the chain at 3,000 feet. Light westerly winds working their way across the central and northern parts of Alaska, and more of a northerly offshore flow working across the northern Gulf, feeding into low pressure sitting right over central and southern parts of southeast. A little bit of a stronger flow should be expected here at this level, generally from Yakutat all the way out toward Prince William Sound, maybe Gustavus here. Those wind speeds running around 35 knots. That seems to be some of the strongest flow we have in the entire region at this point. Putting it all together with turbulence, you'll notice a threat for some isolated moderate across the Chukchi Coast below 4,000 feet, watching for some considerable moderate, generally around Chignik and points southward into the Shelikof Strait region, isolated moderate elsewhere around Kodiak Island.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy and these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling, you know. It's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business, but if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you're lifted up. Your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything. So you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your marine weather now. You'll notice that the sea ice edge remains well north of coastal areas. The closest sea ice we have is probably Kaktoik, about 130 to 140 nautical miles to the north and east to find any pack ice. The distance is even greater from Utqiagvik. You're looking at about 200 nautical miles almost north of Utqiagvik. So the main ice is well offshore, and a number of vessels are working across the North Slope coastlines as we speak this afternoon. This is the latest information as of August 6th. You can always get the latest sea ice outlook as well as seasonal information and maps such as these at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. On to your marine weather forecast now for southeast. Northerly winds will develop around the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with 4-foot seas there on Wednesday. Light north and westerly winds coming down the inside passage elsewhere, 2 to 3-foot seas on the inside. And across the outer coast, generally a north flow, 10 to as strong as 20 knots as you get outside of the Dixon entrance, expecting anywhere from 6 to about 7-foot seas there. For Thursday, winds will shift a little bit more to the north and east from Yakutat all the way to the Dixon entrance, 10 to 15 knots and generally 5 to 6-foot seas. Winds come up in the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And again, this is going to generate some warmer weather in the north. But in the south, we expect to see some showers, at least, for some light rain, and generally light winds will prevail there, 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 3-foot seas on Thursday. For Prince William Sound, northerlies, 20 knots and 3-foot seas, lighter winds outside of Prince William Sound. Northwesterlies blowing a little stronger across the Barren Islands into the small craft zones, 35 knots with 11 to 14-foot seas. Northerlies in Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 and 2 to 3-foot seas there. Expect 2 to 3-foot seas in most of Cook Inlet for Thursday. Northwesterlies diminish just a little bit, 25 to 30 for you, and northerlies inside of Prince William Sound and across the north and western Gulf, anywhere from 3 to 4-foot seas there on Thursday. For Bristol Bay, westerlies pick up a little bit more, 15 to 20 knots, expecting 2 to 4-foot seas. Our westerly winds across Kodiak Island should continue, 25 to 30 knots there with 5 to 9-foot seas, the highest of which will be east of Kodiak Island. For Thursday, northwesterlies continue inside of Shelikof Strait with 4-foot seas there, 6-foot seas on the eastern side, and northwesterlies are crossing the Alaska Peninsula anywhere from 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 5-foot seas expected, the strongest of which will be, the highest of which from Akiak out toward Chignik. As we get into the illusions on Wednesday, South and easterly winds expected across the central and eastern chain, 10 to 20 knots there, and east and southeasterly flow for the far west, anywhere from 4 to 5 foot seas there, 7 foot seas south of Adak and Atka. As you get into Thursday, really not much change at all. The strongest winds continue west of Kiska Island, with southeasterlies anywhere from 15 to 20 knots and 4 to 6 foot seas in general across most of the chain. For the west coast, light winds with west and southwesterly flow coming into Norton Sound, anywhere from 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 3 foot seas there. Southerlies coming in for St. Paul, St. George, and westerlies into the Kuskokwim Delta, looking for about 3 foot seas in most areas. And for Thursday, not much of a change. Winds still somewhat variable across the region, anywhere from about 10 to 15 knots, and seas holding around 2 to 3 foot seas. Southwesterlies coming into Norton Sound, about 2 to 3 foot seas expected in that region as well. North of the Bering Strait, generally southerly winds will prevail, and that deep southerly flow continues well to your south, obviously, so it will be moisture rich in some cases. 2 to 3 foot seas expected into the Chukchi, with 3 to 4 foot seas as you get closer to Utqiagvik, and a light easterly wind coming across the Beaufort seacoast, 10 knots and 2 foot seas for you. That picks up a little bit more on Thursday, looking for as much as 15 to 20 knots with a north and easterly wind, 3 to 4 foot seas in most places with a northeasterly flow coming down the Chukchi, and 3 to 4 foot seas as you get into parts of the outer sections of the Kotzebue Sound region and into the Bering Strait, 10 to 15 knots with a little bit more of a southerly flow lasting into Thursday. A recap of tonight's weather: we have very light winds across most of the Gulf. Low pressure sitting across the north and eastern Gulf, helping to draw in some drier air off the mountains from the Copper River Basin all the way through Cook Inlet and Kodiak Island. Your weather should remain fair for most of the next couple days, but again, a little bit of those outflow winds through the Barren Islands and parts of Shelikof Strait, and that'll be the breeziest sections for you. Flood watch is posted for the Denali National Park area as well as the upper Kuskokwim Valley. The potential for some isolated and locally heavy rain is possible, and with narrow streams and valleys, that could lead to a very quick rise in streams and creeks in the area. So use caution and be mindful of the weather upstream, as changes could happen very quickly. For Wednesday afternoon, watch for shower or thunderstorm activity around the Alcan border, Eagle to about Northway and just westward. And around the boundary range, Skagway, Haines, you're probably looking at the chance for some shower and thunderstorm activity to kind of move over from the Yukon and the British Columbia region. We're seeing that activity this afternoon as well. As we get into Thursday, not much change. Dry weather in the south and unsettled as you head into the interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.